Okay, prepare yourselves because this tale is quite extraordinary. You simply will not credit the extremes to which some individuals will resort for, and I am not exaggerating, approximately 3 minutes of their exceedingly precious time. I likely possess the unofficial distinction for having the most aggressively and repeatedly wrecked fence in my county, perhaps even the state, entirely due to a particular HOA Karen. We shall refer to her as Brenda, as her actual name is probably something equally inclined to insist on speaking with the manager. Brenda, with her perpetual frown and a gas-guzzling SUV the size of a small rhinoceros, determined that my property line was not so much a boundary as a polite notion she could readily bulldoze over whenever convenient. It began inconspicuously, or as inconspicuously as a 2-ton vehicle can be when utilizing your lawn as an exit ramp. However, it intensified. Indeed, it significantly intensified. And when she eventually attempted to sue me after her period of vehicular devastation met an abrupt cessation against my ultimate solution, well, that is when events became genuinely dramatic. Do you believe you have encountered HOA horror stories? Brace yourselves. It all commenced roughly 2 years subsequent to my relocation into what I presumed was my tranquil suburban ideal in a rather agreeable, tree-lined neighborhood. My residence was situated at the terminus of a cul-de-sac, but due to the street layout, if one was approaching from the main road, traversing the corner of my side yard spared them from driving the entire length of our street, executing a U-turn, which was somewhat constricted, and then proceeding back out. Constituted a shortcut, a minor one, reducing travel time by, as I later meticulously clocked, about 2 minutes and 45 seconds if one was truly accelerating. My property boundary on that side was delineated by an uncomplicated, rather quaint 4-foot wooden picket fence. It was not a fortification. It served more as an aesthetic intimation of privacy, the sort of barrier that deters stray canines but not resolute toddlers. Or, as it transpired, enraged Karens in a rush. The initial occurrence involved finding a pair of pickets askew. One of them was fractured. Faint tire impressions were visible in the grass just within the fence line. I surmised some youngster had miscalculated a turn on their bicycle, or perhaps someone experienced a momentary lapse of judgment while parking. I exhaled, retrieved my hammer and some nails, and mended it. Irritating, but such is suburban existence, one might say. A week thereafter, the same situation, but on this occasion, an entire panel was leaning precariously. 2 pickets had snapped cleanly. The tire tracks were more profound, more intentional. My neighbor, old Mr. Henderson from across the street, a delightful gentleman who dedicated most of his days to cultivating his award-winning roses, observed me inspecting the damage. He ambled over, pipe smoke wafting behind him like a benign apparition. "That'll be Brenda again," he stated, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Seen her shiny black tank cutting that corner a few times. Thinks the whole neighborhood's her personal driveway." Brenda. I had a vague recollection of whom he meant. She resided a few streets away, not even on our cul-de-sac, but she was a conspicuous personality in the HOA, the self-designated grand overseer of trivial infractions. She operated a monstrous black SUV, perpetually immaculate, typically with an expression suggesting she had just detected an unpleasant odor, which I imagine was frequently the situation when encountering lesser beings. I had observed her at a couple of HOA meetings where she had discoursed at length regarding the exact shade of beige our mailboxes ought to be or the unacceptable height of someone's grass 2 streets distant. She possessed that air of an individual who presumes rules are for others, the common folk, while she functioned on a superior plane of being where expediency superseded common decency and property statutes. I concluded that a courteous discussion was necessary. The following Saturday, I noticed her SUV parked in her driveway. I fortified myself, walked over, and rang her doorbell. She answered, attired in expensive-looking athleisure wear that had evidently never been inside a gymnasium. Her lips tightened. "Yes," she inquired, her tone implying I was interrupting something of immense importance, such as inventorying her collection of designer indignation. "Hi, Brenda," I commenced, striving for a friendly yet firm demeanor. "I'm your neighbor from the end of Elm Street, number 12. A brief moment of non-recognition, then. Oh, right. The one with the garden gnomes." For clarification, I possessed one. A tasteful little figure nestled beneath a rose bush. Her contempt was palpable. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about my fence," I said. The one on the corner of my property. It seems to be getting damaged quite regularly by someone cutting the corner, and Mr. Henderson mentioned he thought it might be your vehicle. Her eyes narrowed. Are you accusing me of something? Not accusing, I responded, maintaining an even vocal tone. Just trying to figure out what's happening. It's a new fence and it's already been damaged twice. The tire tracks match a large SUV. She scoffed, a sound akin to air escaping a defective designer handbag. My vehicle has state-of-the-art parking sensors. I would never hit a fence. Perhaps you should build a stronger one if it's so fragile. Or maybe, she appended, a saccharine smile that failed to reach her eyes, you shouldn't have it so close to the road if you're worried about traffic. My fence was a good 3 foot inside my property line. It's well within my property line, I stated. And regardless, driving across someone's yard to save a few seconds isn't really acceptable, is it? Her smile disappeared. I have no idea what you're talking about. If you have a problem, take it up with the HOA. Then the door clicked shut in my face. So that was the end of that. Civility had proven ineffective. The subsequent phase, reinforcement and evidence gathering. I repaired the fence once more, this time employing more robust screws and slightly strengthening the posts. I also installed an unobtrusive security camera, one of those compact models that integrates into the eaves of the house, perfectly angled to monitor that corner of the yard and a substantial portion of the street. I reasoned that if she was going to prevaricate to my face, I would obtain irrefutable evidence. It did not require much time. 3 days later, the camera recording was perfectly clear. Brenda's black behemoth, unmistakable, neared the corner. A slight pause, then a definitive maneuver. Not merely cutting the corner on the roadway, but ascending the curb, driving directly over the grassy area and striking the newly mended fence panel, causing splinters to scatter. She did not even reduce her speed. The sheer impudence was astounding. She was not merely being negligent. This was intentional. It was a shortcut and my fence was an obstruction. My anger flared. This was no longer solely about offense, it concerned blatant disrespect and an extraordinary sense of entitlement. I preserved the recording, a small knot of justifiable fury constricting in my chest. I mended the fence yet again. This was becoming costly, not to mention exasperating. I dispatched a courteous email to the HOA attaching the video segment and a concise explanation requesting they converse with Brenda regarding respect for property lines and responsible driving. I included Brenda in the carbon copy so she would be aware I was serious. Her reply was prompt and entirely foreseeable, a carbon-copied response to the HOA board asserting the video was inconclusive and clearly doctored and that I was harassing her. The HOA's official reply a week later was a classic example of bureaucratic evasion. While we encourage all residents to be mindful of property boundaries, this appears to be a private dispute between neighbors. We suggest mediation. Mediation with a woman who categorically denied video proof of her conduct. I felt as though I were in some bizarre comedy. The subsequent occasion the fence was struck. And it was merely a matter of days. I did not even trouble myself with a polite email. The contest, as it is said, was underway. My professional background, you understand, is not in horticulture or suburban disagreements. I am a structural engineer. And Brenda had profoundly misjudged her adversary. She desired to engage in aggressive tactics with my fence. Very well. I would construct a fence for her that she would never forget. The pattern was now solidly in place. Every week or two, with regularity, Brenda's SUV would cause new damage. Occasionally it was a minor impact, splintering a few pickets. At other times she would virtually demolish a section, leaving it dangling like a fractured appendage. Each instance, I would painstakingly record the damage with photographs and save the security camera footage. I amassed a growing archive, a digital testament to her conceit. I would repair the fence using marginally superior materials each time, almost as an investigation to determine what would prompt her to desist. Nothing was effective. It was as if the fence presented an irresistible provocation to her, a personal insult. The HOA continued to be spectacularly unhelpful. My subsequent emails, replete with additional video proof, were met with formulaic replies concerning community concord and recommendations to plant thorny shrubs. Thorny shrubs against a 2-ton SUV operated by a woman possessing the destructive resolve of a renegade armored division. I thought not. The utter ridiculousness of their suggestions was almost humorous were it not so infuriating. They were evidently intimidated by Brenda, who I later discovered had threatened to sue the HOA board members individually for defamation when they had once mildly proposed she moderate her pronouncements about the color of someone's welcome mat. My neighbors were understanding but also cautious. Mr. Henderson would shake his head sorrowfully. "She's a piece of work, that one," he would murmur. Got the whole board tiptoeing around her. "Best to just let it go, son. Some battles ain't worth fighting." But that is where Mr. Henderson and I held different views. This conflict was swiftly evolving into the main event of my otherwise placid suburban existence. It was a question of principle, and if I am candid, a small, rather vengeful part of me was beginning to relish the strategic undertaking. Each mending was a temporary hindrance, a chance to reorganize and devise my subsequent action. I began to perceive it as a very low consequence, highly localized type of conflict. My picket fence was the Maginot Line, and Brenda was the Blitzkrieg. My initial protective measures were clearly insufficient. It was time for a substantial enhancement in defenses. The concept for the ultimate fence solution materialized one evening as I was examining the most recent recording of Brenda's SUV casually sideswiping my construction. She never even glanced. Just straightforward, focused on her objective, those invaluable saved seconds. She was so self-assured, so audacious. She evidently believed there would be no repercussions, that my fence was merely an insubstantial, replaceable object in her daily theatrics. What if, I mused, the fence appeared flimsy and replaceable, but was not? What if it seemed to be the identical, unassuming wooden picket fence, yet concealed a core of absolute, unyielding resistance? My engineering mind went into overdrive. I began to draft designs, performing initial calculations. Wood is pliable. Steel is not. Particularly not to the fiberglass and plastic elements of a luxury SUV's front section. A mischievous small smile formed on my lips. "Oh, Brenda," I contemplated, "you have no inkling of what is approaching." My investigation phase commenced. I required materials that could replicate the appearance of the current wooden pickets and rails but offer considerably superior structural strength. I explored reinforced polymers and composite materials, but ultimately chose traditional steel, specifically hollow steel tubing for the posts and rails, and thinner yet still durable steel plates for the pickets. The critical element was the concealment. It needed to appear, from a distance and even to a casual observer up close, precisely like the remainder of my wooden fence. This necessitated meticulous focus on measurements, paint, and surface finish. I located a local metal fabrication business operated by a brusque but equitable older gentleman named S. I approached him with my comprehensive schematics. He examined them, then regarded me with a curious sparkle in his eye. "This here's a mighty robust picket fence, son," he remarked, tapping the blueprint. "Planning on keeping out a rogue elephant?" I chuckled. "Something like that, S. Let's just say I have a persistent pest problem and the usual deterrents aren't cutting it." He grunted. "Heard that before. Some folks just don't respect boundaries." He provided a quotation which was not inconsiderable, but by this juncture I viewed it as an expenditure for my tranquility and, frankly, for a measure of long overdue retribution. "Want it painted to match?" he inquired. "Perfectly," I replied. "I want it to be indistinguishable from the cheap pine I've been replacing every other week." S grinned. "Consider it done. This thing ain't going to budge. Whatever hits this is going to know about it." That was exactly the intention. While S commenced fabricating the components, I had another vital task to undertake, the foundation. A steel fence's strength is contingent upon its anchoring. I rented a power auger and excavated post holes that were, to state it mildly, excessive for a standard picket fence, 3 feet deep and a foot in diameter. Each was destined to be filled with high-strength concrete. I also intended to lay a continuous concrete footing, reinforced with rebar, beneath the section most frequently impacted by Brenda. This was not merely a fence, it was to be a defensive structure. My weekends transformed into a period of quiet, systematic work. I performed the excavation and concrete pouring in phases, endeavoring to maintain a relatively inconspicuous profile. Mr. Henderson observed with bemusement from his porch. "Putting in a new fence again?" he called over one Saturday. "You're a persistent fella." "This one's going to be a bit different, Mr. H," I responded with a smile. "A bit more persuasive." He merely puffed on his pipe and nodded slowly. I believe he was beginning to realize that something more than straightforward repair was in progress. He had witnessed enough of Brenda's behavior to likely harbor a silent aspiration for her deserved consequence. The most crucial aspect, naturally, was guaranteeing the new, reinforced segment integrated flawlessly with the existing, perfectly conventional wooden fence that extended along the remainder of my property line. It had to present as a continuous, seemingly fragile stretch. Brenda's favored impact area was a specific 10-foot section directly at the vertex of the curve she traversed. That would become fortress fence. The rest would stay as standard wood and innocuous front. The brilliance of it lay in the subterfuge. She would approach, anticipating the usual pliant give, the gratifying sound of splintering wood. She would encounter, instead, an unmovable barrier. I painstakingly measured the existing pickets, their intervals, and the height of the rails. The steel components S was producing would be identical in their dimensions. The paint was a custom blend to match the slightly aged white of the rest of the fence. I even intended to lightly distress the paint on the new section once installed to create the illusion it had been there for some time, weathering the same sun and precipitation. No detail was insignificant. My security camera, now an upgraded higher-resolution model with superior night vision, was impeccably positioned to record the entire splendid incident. I even set up a secondary camera from an alternative viewpoint merely for backup. I was ensuring no aspect was left to fate. The sense of anticipation mounted. It felt like orchestrating an intricate, entirely lawful, and wholly warranted practical joke, the type that concludes with a gratifying impact. S telephoned a few weeks later. Your, special fence sections are ready. Son. I drove to his workshop. The fabricated steel components were impressive. The pickets consisted of 1/8-inch thick steel plates securely welded to 2-inch square steel tube rails. The posts were 4-inch square steel tubes with a 1/4-inch wall thickness, painted a perfect, unassuming white. They deceptively resembled wood. However, when I lifted one, its weight conveyed a different reality. This was a serious undertaking. S clapped me on the shoulder. Whatever you're planning, good luck, and send me a video if it's interesting. I assured him I would. The installation occupied a full weekend. I removed the old, damaged wooden posts and panels from the Brenda zone. Then, with substantial exertion, I guided the new steel posts into their deep, concrete-lined apertures. Each post was secured with quick-setting, high-strength concrete, perfectly plumbed. The steel panels, weighty and unyielding, were subsequently bolted to the posts using hardened steel bolts. I employed tamper-resistant bolt heads just in case Brenda conceived any notions of dismantling it afterward. Upon completion, I stepped back to appreciate my efforts. It appeared precisely like the old fence, a perfect, innocent white picket fence. But I knew that 10-foot section was now, in essence, a low-profile steel bulwark. I even lightly abraded the paint with some sandpaper and artfully applied a few smudges of dirt to make it look weathered and unassuming. It was a superb example of malicious adherence. Now all that remained was to wait. It resembled fishing, but instead of a trout, I was angling for a 2-ton SUV driven by an entitled threat. The interval was not lengthy. Brenda's pattern was consistent. She typically cut the corner en route home from her job, usually between 5:30 and 6 p.m. On the third day following the installation of Fortress Fence, a Tuesday, I was in my kitchen, ostensibly preparing dinner, but in reality, my senses were alert for the familiar sound of her SUV. I had the live broadcast from the security cameras displayed on my tablet. At 5:47 p.m., there she was, the black rhinoceros, proceeding down the street, her turn signal conspicuously inactive as usual. She neared the corner. I held my breath. My heart was beating somewhat faster than normal. This was the decisive moment. She did not even pause. The SUV executed its usual arrogant turn towards my property line. The front passenger side tire mounted the curb. She was aiming for her customary spot, the precise center of my newly reinforced section. I leaned nearer to the tablet, a grin spreading across my face. This was destined to be magnificent. The impact was not the splintering crunch to which I had become accustomed. It was a dull, metallic thud, succeeded by a dreadful screeching, grinding sound. On the camera display, I observed Brenda's SUV jolt violently to a stop, its front end visibly deformed against my pristine, unyielding white fence. The fence itself? It did not shift. Not a fraction of an inch, not a tremor. It stood there serenely, mockingly, as if to declare, "Is that your best effort?" Brenda's head jerked forward, then backward. I imagine her expensive latte likely redecorated her dashboard. For a splendid few seconds, there was silence. Then, the SUV's horn commenced blaring, a continuous, distressed cry as if the vehicle itself were protesting the unfairness of meeting an object that declined to give way. The driver's side door flew open and Brenda practically tumbled out, grasping her head. Her face, even on the indistinct tablet image, was a visage of disbelief and blazing fury. She stared at her damaged vehicle, then at my fence, then back at her vehicle. It appeared she could not grasp what had just transpired. Her formerly sleek, arrogant SUV now bore a very clear, very costly-looking indentation in its front fender. The headlight was shattered and the bumper dangled at a precarious angle. My fence, however, looked prepared for a feature in a home and garden magazine. Not a blemish, not a mark, aside from those I had skillfully applied myself. Brenda began to yell. It was a high-frequency, jumbled screech of rage. She kicked her own tire, which I presume only injured her foot. Then she directed her focus to my fence. She strode over to it, seized one of the pickets, and attempted to shake it. Naturally, it remained steadfast. It was secured in hundreds of pounds of concrete and constructed of solid steel. She might as well have tried to agitate the foundations of the planet. Her face twisted. She appeared utterly distraught. I saved the footage, of course. Every glorious second. Mr. Placefixed and his 11. Henderson had emerged onto his porch, drawn by the commotion. He was observing, pipe in hand, a slow smile spreading across his face. Other neighbors were starting to peek out of their windows. Brenda, oblivious to her audience, was now pacing back and forth, gesticulating wildly and still yelling, though I couldn't make out the words from inside my house. Then she did exactly what I expected her to do. She pulled out her phone and I presumed called the police, probably to report my vicious, car-attacking fence. I calmly picked up my own phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. Yes, I'd like to report a single vehicle accident on my property, I said, my voice a model of calm concern. A driver appears to have lost control and collided with my fence. She seems uninjured but quite agitated. The police arrived within approximately 10 minutes. 2 officers, appearing slightly bemused as Brenda, now flushed and practically quivering with anger, confronted them, pointing a trembling finger first at her damaged SUV and then at my steadfast, innocent-appearing fence. I ambled out, the epitome of a concerned homeowner. "Officers, thank you for coming," I stated politely. "Is everything all right?" I heard a loud crash. Brenda spun towards me. This is your fault. Your stupid fence. It's some kind of death trap." Officer Miller, as his name tag indicated, looked from Brenda to me, then to the fence, then to the clearly visible tire tracks leading directly from the road, over the curb across my lawn, and ending abruptly at the point of impact on the fence. Officer Davis was inspecting the front of Brenda's SUV with a professionally dubious expression. "Ma'am," Officer Miller stated, his voice calm but firm, "it appears you drove your vehicle off the roadway and onto private property, colliding with this gentleman's fence." "He did something to it?" Brenda shrieked. "It's never done that before. I barely tapped it. It's reinforced. It's a trick." I arched an eyebrow. "A trick, ma'am? There's a fence on my property where it's supposed to be. Perhaps if you hadn't been driving on my lawn, this wouldn't have happened." Officer Miller turned to me. "Sir, has this been an ongoing issue?" "Unfortunately, yes, officer," I replied. "This is, I believe, let me check my records. The 7th time this particular section of fence has been struck by a vehicle cutting the corner in the last few months. I have extensive video documentation of previous incidents, including several clear videos of this same vehicle causing damage. After the last few repairs, I decided to invest in a sturdier build for this particular section, as it was becoming quite costly to keep replacing it with standard wood. I made sure to emphasize sturdier build, not impenetrable steel fortress design to wreak havoc on entitled SUV drivers. Brenda was sputtering. "He admits it. He made it stronger on purpose to damage my car." Officer Davis finally spoke up, straightening from his inspection of the SUV. "Ma'am, the primary cause of damage to your vehicle appears to be your vehicle striking a stationary object while not on a designated roadway. The composition of the fence is immaterial to that fact. Homeowners are entitled to build robust fences on their own property." He then looked at my fence more closely. "Looks like a standard picket fence to me, sir. Good, solid construction, though." I managed not to grin. "Thank you, officer. I take pride in my home maintenance." Brenda was nearly apoplectic. She demanded they arrest me for, well, she was unclear on the charge. Destruction of her SUV by fence. Perhaps? Malicious placement of property? The officers patiently explained to her multiple times that she was the one at fault. They took her license and registration, took my statement, and surveyed the scene. They noted the clear path her vehicle had taken. They even asked if I wanted to press charges for property damage. I magnanimously declined. The fence seems to have handled it quite well this time, officer, I said. I think Mrs. I paused, pretending to search for her name. Brenda has probably learned her lesson. The glare she shot me could have melted steel, or at least ordinary wooden pickets. The officers issued Brenda a citation for reckless driving and failure to maintain control of her vehicle. Her SUV, looking very sorry for itself, eventually had to be towed. As the tow truck winched her crumpled status symbol away, I saw Mr. Henderson give me a discreet thumbs up from his porch. The sweet, sweet taste of victory. But oh, it was not concluded. Not by a significant margin. Brenda, as it happened, was not the sort to assimilate lessons. She was the type to intensify her efforts. A week later, I received a lawsuit. She was suing me for damages to her vehicle, for establishing a perilous and intentionally hidden impediment, and for emotional distress. The impudence was genuinely astounding. I actually chuckled when I perused the summons. This was going to be even more enjoyable than I had anticipated. My initial telephone call was to my insurance provider, who, after I elucidated the circumstances and transmitted the copious video evidence I had gathered over the months, plus the police report, were surprisingly encouraging. So, she repeatedly drove onto your property, damaged your fence multiple times, you built a stronger fence, and she hit it again and now she's suing you? My claims adjuster, a woman named Carol with a wonderfully dry sense of humor, inquired. That's bold. You could say that, I responded. I believe the legal term is chutzpah. Carol chuckled. We'll assign an attorney. This sounds like it should be a fairly straightforward defense given your evidence. People are amazing, aren't they? Amazing indeed. The lawyer allocated to me, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, was thrilled with the abundance of evidence I furnished. We possessed hours of footage of Brenda's SUV engaging in demolition derby with my original fence. We had receipts for all the mending. We had the recording of the principal crash, complete with Brenda's ensuing breakdown. We had the police report unequivocally stating Brenda was culpable. We even had Mr. Brenda Straylist Henderson, who, upon learning Brenda was suing me, volunteered to provide a statement regarding her long-established practice of utilizing my yard as a shortcut. That woman needs to be taught a lesson in humility, he proclaimed, his eyes sparkling. And I'm just the fellow to help deliver it. Brenda's lawsuit was a masterwork of self-pity and deflection of responsibility. Her lawyer, a slick-looking individual who appeared to specialize in optimistic, if factually dubious, legal actions, contended that I had enticed Brenda into a snare by making the reinforced segment of the fence appear identical to the weaker portions. They asserted I had a duty of care to guarantee my fence was uniformly delicate, or at least to display warning signs that a section of it was, in reality, constructed to endure the impact of a rogue rhinoceros. It was utterly ludicrous. They depicted Brenda as an innocent commuter who had merely strayed slightly off the roadway and met a maliciously engineered barricade intended to inflict maximum harm. The emotional distress allegation was particularly notable, enumerating her purported trauma from the event and the public embarrassment of having her damaged car towed. Our defense was uncomplicated. I possessed every entitlement to construct a fence of any material I selected on my own property, particularly considering the recurrent demolition of my prior, less sturdy fences. Brenda was trespassing. Brenda was driving recklessly. Brenda was responsible for her own damages. Ms. Albright was especially anticipating cross-examining Brenda. She's going to tie herself in knots, she forecasted with a grin after our pretrial conference. People like that, they can't help but reveal their own arrogance on the stand. The case, fortunately, did not extend for years. Given the lucidity of the evidence, the judge decided on a summary judgment hearing. This meant we would present our main arguments and proof, and the judge could issue a ruling without a lengthy, drawn-out trial if the facts were sufficiently evident. The day of the hearing came. Brenda was present, clad in what she likely deemed power business attire, appearing stern and aggrieved. Her lawyer projected a smarmy self-assurance that I found rather vexing. I, conversely, felt remarkably composed. I had veracity, rationality, and approximately 50 gigabytes of video evidence on my side. Miss Albright was an image of cool professionalism. Brenda's lawyer commenced by portraying his client as the casualty of a vengeful homeowner's peculiar and hazardous fixation with fence building. He spoke of the concealed peril and the unforeseeable risk. Then it was Albright's turn. She systematically deconstructed his entire plea. She began by displaying a montage of video recordings, clip upon clip of Brenda's black SUV flagrantly cutting the corner, striking the wooden fence, causing splinters to fly. The judge, a severe-visaged woman with keen eyes, observed intently, her expression inscrutable. Then Ms. Albright showed the footage of the final crash in slow motion from two different angles, the tire tracks clearly departing the paved road, mounting the curb, traversing my grass, the impact, the fence immobile, the SUV crumpling. Your Honor, Miss Albright stated, the plaintiff, Mrs. Brenda last name, established a clear and undeniable pattern of trespass and property destruction over several months. My client, after numerous unreciprocated attempts at neighborly communication and repeated costly repairs, exercised his legal right to install a durable fence on his own property. The only hazard present on that day was the plaintiff's reckless operation of her motor vehicle. She then presented the police report, Mr. Henderson's sworn affidavit, and the receipts for all the previous fence repairs. When it was Brenda's turn to be questioned by Ms. Albright, it was, as anticipated, a prime example of self-sabotage. Mrs. Last name, Ms. Albright began, her voice deceptively gentle, is it your testimony that you were unaware you were driving off the paved roadway and onto my client's private property? Brenda sniffed. I may have slightly veered. The road there is tricky enough to consistently veer onto the same patch of lawn, through the same section of fence, multiple times a week for several months, as shown in these videos? Ms. Albright gestured to the screen where a compilation of Brenda's shortcuts was still paused. Brenda's face tightened. I don't recall the specifics. That video is misleading. Misleading? How Mrs. Last name? Is that not your vehicle? Is that not my client's property? Well, yes, but he shouldn't have a fence there if it's so easy to hit. The judge actually raised an eyebrow at that one. Miss Albright pressed on. So, you believe property owners should remove obstacles from your preferred path even if that path is across their private lawn? It was just a small shortcut. Brenda exclaimed, her voice rising. It saved me several minutes. He's just being vindictive, putting up some kind of metal death trap. A metal death trap, Mrs. Last name, or a standard fence constructed of durable materials placed legally on private property which you then chose to drive into? Miss Albright's voice was like chipped ice. Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her lawyer, who was studiously avoiding eye contact. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Last name, the court has seen extensive video evidence of you repeatedly and deliberately driving your vehicle onto the plaintiff's property, causing damage to his fence. On the day in question, you did so again, and this time your vehicle sustained damage because the fence, quite reasonably, did not yield. Can you explain to this court why you believe Mr. Protagonist's last name is responsible for the consequences of your actions? Brenda stammered. Because he changed it. He made it stronger without telling me. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Even her own lawyer seemed to cower slightly. The judge stared at Brenda for a long moment, then sighed audibly. I believe I've heard enough, she said. The plaintiffs claim that the defendant created a hazardous condition by lawfully erecting a sturdy fence on his own property, in a location where the plaintiff had repeatedly trespassed and caused damage, is, to put it mildly, entirely without merit. The notion that the defendant had a duty of care to ensure his fence was easily destructible by the plaintiff's vehicle is absurd. The judge's words were like hammer blows. This court finds that the damages sustained by the plaintiff's vehicle were the direct and sole result of the plaintiff's own reckless driving and trespass. Furthermore, this lawsuit itself borders on the frivolous. My heart soared. Ms. Albright gave me a small, satisfied nod. The judge wasn't finished. Therefore, the plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. That meant she couldn't sue me again for the same thing. And, given the clear evidence of repeated property damage inflicted by the plaintiff prior to this incident, and the defendant's forbearance in not pursuing those prior damages until now, I am inclined to entertain a countersuit for those damages, should the defendant wish to file one. Ms. Albright smoothly interjected. Your Honor, my client has indeed prepared such a counterclaim for the cost of repeated repairs to his fence prior to the installation of the reinforced section, totaling approximately $850, plus the cost of his court fees for this frivolous lawsuit. Brenda looked like she was about to explode. Her lawyer looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. The judge reviewed the itemized list of repairs and the video evidence correlating the damage to Brenda's vehicle. Counterclaim granted in full, the judge declared. Mrs. Last Name, you will pay Mr. Protagonist's last name the sum of $850 for property damages, plus his reasonable court costs. And I would strongly advise you to find a different route for your commute. Driving over lawns is generally frowned upon, both by homeowners and by the law. She banged her gavel. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Brenda was assessed a fine for her reckless driving by the traffic court, based on the police report and the video evidence I supplied for that separate, minor charge, and she also received points on her license. While not a sentence in the criminal jail time sense, for someone like Brenda, the combination of public humiliation, the financial sting, the damage to her driving record, and the irrefutable legal judgment against her was probably a far more effective punishment. She had to pay for the extensive damage to her own Rhino SUV out of pocket, as her insurance unsurprisingly declined her claim once they saw the police report and the circumstances. The aftermath was tranquil, gloriously tranquil. Brenda, humbled and with a lighter purse, no longer cut the corner. In fact, I seldom observed her SUV in the neighborhood at all for several months. When she did eventually reappear, she drove with conspicuous caution, consistently remaining well within the marked lanes, particularly when passing my residence. My fence, the fortress fence section, stood proud and untouched, a silent guardian. It achieved a kind of local renown. Mr. Proud, as Maester to Didion Henderson, took great delight in recounting the narrative to anyone who would lend an ear, usually augmenting it with dramatic emphasis. He built a fence of pure iron will, that boy did. He would declare, gesturing with his pipe. And that Karen drove right into it. Bam! Like hitting a mountain. The HOA, surprisingly, even dispatched a rather abashed letter to me, apologizing for their prior lack of action and expressing gratitude for my resolution of a persistent community issue, which was ironic considering their earlier position. I learned through informal channels that Brenda's sway on the HOA board diminished considerably following her public legal defeat. Some facilitators, it appears, only facilitate when they do not apprehend being brought down with the antagonist. The finest aspect, however, was the serenity. No longer did I awaken to discover my property defaced. No more tiresome mending. No more simmering outrage at the sheer presumption. Merely the quiet contentment of a problem elegantly and definitively resolved. My exceptionally strong, deceptively ordinary-looking fence became a personal emblem, a confirmation that with a measure of ingenuity, substantial patience, and an unwillingness to be intimidated, even the most audacious Karen can be subdued. And periodically, when I am in the yard, I pat one of those steel pickets with affection. It incurred some expense, certainly, but the expression on Brenda's face when her SUV crumpled against it was invaluable. And the ensuing legal repudiation? Perfection. So, if you are contending with a neighborhood irritation that is complicating your existence, recall this account. Occasionally, the most effective defense is a sound, solid, unexpectedly robust defense disguised as an unassuming white picket fence.